is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. Let these words, let our meditations, let our actions serve to proclaim a healing word. Amen. I'm going to invite you to think about your days in literature, in your days of storytelling. Think back when you were writing a story. What were the elements that you used that made a great story? What makes a great story?
Exciting characters. A good beginning.
A good beginning. Exciting characters.
A problem.
A problem. What else? Surprise?
A great moral dilemma.
The moral dilemmas create stories. Suspense. Think about a love story. Boy meets girl.
Boy loses girl.
Boy loses girl. Girl meets the boy's enemy. The boy and the enemy struggle. The boy gets the girl. They live happily ever after.
Except for boring.
Boring. Boring. Too funny. We're talking about stories today. In the scriptures, there are a number of meta-narratives, meta-stories, particularly in the Hebrew scriptures. Those stories that have kind of running stories within them, but there's an overarching. And I'm wondering, maybe we can just think, if I use a word, think if you can think of the story that goes with it. So if I use the word bondage, can you think of the meta-story of bondage? Can you think of some detail in the scriptures? Slavery. Anything else? I'm inviting you to cast your memory over, your Hebrew Bible lessons. Bondage, slavery. How about wilderness?
40 days and 40 nights.
40 days and 40 nights. 40 years wandering. 40 is biblical code for a really long time. 40 days, 40 years is a whole lot longer than 40 days. But that's all it means. Wilderness, can you think of some detail about wilderness? Moses wandered in the wilderness.
No water.
Pardon?
No water.
No water. John the Baptist was in the wilderness. Abraham and Sarah wandered to a land that God would show them, so there's something about wandering. How about captivity? If I use the word captivity.
Babylonian. Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar. You used to listen to these on records. This is all they got to listen to. While we were listening to the Beatles, Myrna was listening to Bible stories. What other stories when you think about captivity? Right? These are the meta stories in the history of the Hebrew people. How about salvation? Which is, and that's a word that comes to us from the New Testament. It's a New Testament word. The Greek word is sozo. It means like a healing balm. It's healing, salvation. So what's a salvation story? David and Goliath. Interesting. Okay, yeah, right. What's the big salvation story?
Jesus.
Pardon? Parting the water is a salvation story. For sure it is. Jesus, the big Jesus story. Good Friday, Easter Sunday is the big Jesus story. That's the big. How about end times? End times. The word is eschatological. Eschatology. Noah, a bit. Letter of John, Revelation to John, that last book of the Bible. Daniel in the lion's den is about end times. These are the meta stories that bound certainly the Hebrew people, and they bound them together as a people. The story that Myrna read this morning, this Passover story, is a transition story between two meta stories. One of bondage, two wilderness. How's that for crazy? Bondage to wilderness. And you'll remember that there were 9 plagues, and then this was the 10th. And it's a super story. This is the story that Jesus would have celebrated from the time he was born. It's an annual festival. Faithful pilgrims made their journey to Jerusalem to recount this story. The Last Supper, about which we speak and sing, is in fact the Passover supper. It's the great festival. So there's this deep link. There's 2 things going on in this story. And you heard Sophia beautifully talk about what's going on. I'm preaching off an iPad. It's my first time, so it's a new experience. So there's 2 things that are going on. Sophia spoke about one of them. And she held up this incredible picture. It's still there. Oh, it's gone. There's Pharaoh. And we think the power struggles with Moses. Nah, it's power struggle with God. As God has called Moses out of the burning bush, and Moses ran off and said, I'm not doing that. Remember, he went off to an oasis and he herded sheep, and he said, I'm not doing that. Well, how many times do we run away from those things God calls us to do? Moses is back. Okay, God, I'm here. And visits Pharaoh on behalf of God 9 times. Please let my people go. Let the people go. And Pharaoh says no. This is a power struggle. Interesting how many times we get caught in power struggles. And we absolutely do this in a power struggle. Right? We meet power with power. I was listening to Barack Obama this morning on the news, talking about the 2 terrorist groups. We're going to wipe them out. And I said to myself, do you think there's not another group behind them? Right? Power struggles. That's what's going on. God and Pharaoh. It's a story about a power struggle between the Pharaoh and God. The second thing that's going on is the question that really floats by us today, and I'll speak about that in a few minutes. But are the Israelites, are they going to worship God? Are they going to actually give their trust, complete abject trust, to God? Or are they going to stay in the safe places of the culture that enfold them and hold them? We know what happens, don't we, in this story? The Passover happens, but the Pharaoh's son is also dies in this, which is in his grief he releases the Israelites. So they get up and they go. That's why the Passover meal needed to be eaten so quickly, was because they're going to move right now. No leftovers, burn them. So they go, and we've all seen the 10 Commandments, right? With Charlton Heston, cotton bat and beard, remember? You don't even know who Charlton Heston is, do you? Right. Okay, it's an old movie. It's called The 10 Commandments. You can Google it, and you can probably get it on YouTube. Probably. But check it out. It's Charlton Heston, right?
We have it.
There you go. They have it. Yay. Is it on VHS?
Yeah.
Perfect. So what happens? They go and they start wandering, and the Pharaoh changes his mind and wants to go bring them back. And of course they're at the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, we need another miracle, and so Moses takes his staff and he holds out his staff and parts the Red Sea, and the Israelites wander through, and the Egyptians give chase, and the Israelites end up on the other shore while the swirling waters of the Red Sea. You know the story, right? And then what happens? There's a 40-year process of wandering and wondering what to do with this freedom. That's what's going on, right? It could be a wandering journey. My friend I always used to do that. Hugh Stansfield used to talk about the 40 years of wandering in the desert. There were international trade routes running through where it is said that they would have wandered. It's a metaphor. 40 years of wandering and wondering what to do with the freedom. And at every turn, what did the Israelites want to do? They wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to go back to the culture that held them captive, that held them in bondage, because it was easier and they knew what they would eat. There was a chicken in every pot. It was perfect, right? What are we doing in the desert? What are we doing with this freedom? Starving. Let's go back. So the question then gets lifted up for us. What the question that gets lifted up for us is, what story do we pay attention to? Will we give our lives to the same God that Jesus gave his life to? You see, Jesus becomes, this is the root of Orthodox Christianity, this story. Right? They slaughter the lamb, they paint the blood on the lintels of the doors. That's weird. Jesus becomes the lamb that gets slaughtered, whose blood is poured out for our sins. Right? This story becomes Orthodox Christianity. And we play out that story during Holy Week every year. We play that same story. This is a meta-foundational story. It's the story to which Jesus gave his life to. It's also countercultural. It's the story that bound the Jewish people. It still binds them today. It's the story for which they give their lives to. There's another story that other people give their lives to. We think of the Palestinians. We think about people who will give their lives for the story that they tell. And so we're left with this whole question of what happens to us when we're in power struggles, and what story do we give our lives to? Do we give our lives to the same God that Jesus gave his life to? Worst question is, what's the cost? You know, at Waves, yesterday we kind of danced up this road just a bit. And we said, I think I'll go this far. I'll get here, but I'm not going the whole way. Right? I really like the culture. I really like what it means to live in this world. And so we're caught in this dance between giving our lives fully in a countercultural movement to God and trapped in a culture that says that's the antithesis of it. What do we do with all of that? I came, Jesus said, that they might have life and have it abundantly. And so apply that thought to this story. That's God's promise. In the power struggles of our lives, in our halting, faltering commitment to the God that Jesus gave his life to. I came that you will have life. And that God is with us in the process all the time. What story will we give our lives to?